Today we're going to talk about the truth, and the truth will set you free. So what is the truth in politics? Some people think it's just a matter of collecting facts, and the person with the most facts wins. But truth is really how you interpret information that is not subject to change when you have new information or new facts. And so the truth really is in you. It's something that comes from your perceptions and how you see the world. And so to get at the truth, you really have to be honest with yourself and not only with the facts. And so how can I be honest with the truth and thereby become freed? For one thing, you have to just let other people believe and say what they want. Trying to censor others really is because you really are applying limited thought. If you are allowing yourself to have free thought, then you don't have a need to control or to limit other people and what they say or how they believe. A lot of what we see in social media today are just people criticizing others for what they believe or what they say that they don't agree with. But you really have to come to your own understanding about the world, and that's how you get to know what is true from what is untrue. And so how can I know something if I'm not really being honest about what I want to know? You have to search deeper. Want to look deeper at things? Look at the Constitution. The Constitution was really the truth about our form of government and the basis on which we formed a union and created our laws. The laws that are of the Constitution are not the laws of the kings, who could simply dictate the law. So the law, according to them, was the law that was the law of the land that would apply to everyone. These kings were called sovereigns because they believed that their laws were given to them by God, and it was through their laws and commands that other people were to serve. Out of this concept is where we got the idea of religious freedom, which is a personal beliefs, and my personal beliefs cannot be dictated by a sovereign authority. Not only limited to a king, but to any objective form of power. In other words, a government, any kind of corporate authority cannot dictate to me what I believe or what I do not believe. The laws that I am governed by are the laws of nature or the laws of my conscience or the laws of my religion or religious beliefs, but not by the laws that can be mandated by the state or by the government authorities. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding about the Constitution because a lot of people lay claim to it. People on the left, they think the Constitution is just to make laws for them. Whatever they believe is what ought to be made into laws so that it would apply to everyone. The purpose of the Constitution is to establish sovereignty and how sovereign authority cannot be invested in a person, a government, or a state. Sovereign authority is only that authority within a individual or an authority within a divine being or whatever you want to call it. Only that kind of authority really has a right or a power over us. This is explained in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence by referring to the inalienable rights that are endowed to us by a creator. So obviously, a king or a secular authority does not qualify as a creator. And not being a creator, they have no sovereignty or sovereign power over us. On the other hand, those on the right, some of them religious right, believe that there's some kind of sovereign authority, sovereign power that is invested in the government or invested in the state, which can be imposed. Most on the right believe that it's states' rights over government rights, and so they want limited government, meaning only that the state should have this authority or power to make laws and to impose these laws on others. This too goes against the principle of sovereignty, in which sovereignty cannot be invested in a government or state authority. And so, why is the Constitution interpreted in all of these different ways, except the ways of the Founding Fathers and the ways that it was written, both in the Constitution and in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence? Well, the reason is because people want to impose their views on others. They want to limit their power to speak and to think as they please. And so what we have to do is we have to have a civil society, a society that allows free speech, it allows free thought, it allows people to think and communicate as they choose to communicate without any censorship at all. That doesn't mean that we have to form a consensus around what other people say or what they believe, or that we have to even respect these different views, or that we have to entertain what other people say. But we do have to realize that people have this right because this inherent right is how they come to their own understanding about the sovereignty that is within them in order to govern their own lives. And so it can't be my authority or an individual's authority, but it's an authority that comes through a mutual understanding that is part of a civil culture and people. People that try to impose their authority on other people, some are religious, but some are not. And so it doesn't really matter specifically what kind of people we're talking about, as much as the purpose and intention of the communication, and how people acknowledge others, and they either permit them to speak their minds and to say as they would, or they try to censor them, and in so doing deny them their right to speak or to peacefully assemble. And so the Constitution, when you realize that it's not a biased document, it's a document that gives everyone an opportunity to define freedom for themselves and not to have a rule imposed upon them by others. Hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about myths and lies about the Constitution. Judge that do not be judged. The measure you meet will be measured unto you. Many people assume that the Constitution is not about religion. And they're right. The Constitution is not about religion, but it definitely uses religious language and makes references to religious terms, such as the Creator or providence. They're terms you could say are taken from the Bible tradition and have a special meaning in terms of religious thoughts and ideas. The term creator is specifically referencing a higher power, something that is sovereign, and something that whose laws act independently of human laws. And so we discussed that in our first video about sovereignty and the meaning of sovereignty. Now, the founders had many different opinions about religion, and some of them changed their opinions frequently. And so you can't base your understanding of the Constitution solely on what you think they believed or didn't believe about religious thoughts or ideas. There were just certain common ground that they all agreed on. And one of those was the Judaic-Christian tradition that is based on the commandments of Moses, the 10 Commandments. And so those were the laws as originally were presented to Moses by God, who was the sovereign authority or power. And this is the basis of all religious thinking pertaining to the words written in the Bible. Now, the Constitution is like the Bible in the sense that a lot of people have opinions about what they think the Bible says or what it's about. but they never read it, and they've never read it or studied it. And then when they read it, they've always gone to authorities or experts to explain it for them. And so most people don't believe they could understand the Constitution on their own without referencing a lawyer, a judge, or an expert to explain it to them and for them. My contention is you can learn and teach anything to yourself, that you're not limited. One of the fallacies of our times is we rely too much on expertise, and which are just narrow opinions of others, in order to base our own opinions and views. And so we're going to look at the Bible a little bit and the Constitution to see the connection, but let's examine it with an open mind to judge for ourselves as not to defer to the judgment of others. Okay? And so we start with the words that seem to refer to God, the Creator. And we talked about that in our first video. Next is prudence. And what is prudence referred to in the Constitution? How does that relate to the idea of God or sovereignty? The principle of sovereignty depends on the concept of divine law, that there are certain laws that are not written laws by man, and they're not created by man, but nevertheless they are laws to which we are bound. And so some people call these laws karma. They have many different names to describe these laws. Divine laws would be a reference to the Bible and Moses and the Ten Commandments in particular. But let's look at some any reference that you have to anything that is not based on human authority or human laws. These are the main point that the Founding Fathers had, was that you have a sovereign authority, human authority. You have a divine law, human laws. And so this Constitution was not written and based on human authority or human laws, but only when human laws and authority go contrary to laws that are sovereign or laws that are divine, to use a scriptural reference. Now I'm going to read the part on the Constitution preamble where it talks about the providence, so that we can read it and understand it in context and what it says about human nature, the same as the part on the Creator and what it says in reference to human authority. The preamble to the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Now let's look at the Constitution in context. In red, I have the subjects outlined in the first two paragraphs, and in blue you see the verbs, and in green is the object of each subject. So the subject in the first paragraph is the Creator and all men, and that the Creator created all men equal and endowed them with certain inalienable rights.
So among these inalienable rights, the Creator endowed men with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So these last comments refer to divine laws. The divine laws that the Creator, according to the Creator's divine laws, was everything made. And so that's why the Creator is the sovereign and the sovereign authority over all life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And so in the first paragraph, there's no mention of human laws or government because this has nothing to do with human government or human authority. In the second paragraph, the subject starts with the government is the subject and men. And what does this have to say about the government and man? It says the government derives its just powers from man, from their consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive. Now, this here is interesting because it's more specific. It's saying any form of government. It's not just saying some kinds of governments and some forms of governments, but any form of government, democratic, republic, any kind of government whatsoever becomes destructive. Of these ends, it is the right of the people or of men to alter or abolish it. And so here it's referring to the governed, those that give consent, and from where the government derives its just powers. And so in this paragraph, we see how human laws are subject to the governed, but the governed are subject to the creators and the Creator's laws, out of which we have the benefit of liberty, justice, and happiness for all. Now let's look at the third paragraph. Now it refers to God as prudence. The subject again is in red, prudence and government and mankind. So this last paragraph is a summation of the first two paragraphs that first talk about God in relation to man, and then man in relation to the government. Now, part of what defines divine law is the order and how things are applied. And so it starts with sovereignty, and then out of sovereignty we are able to understand divine laws, having a knowledge of the sovereignty of God, authority. And from those laws, then we're able to govern ourselves or to appoint those that would serve these purposes. So prudence then is God's judgment, and how God as a sovereign is the only and sole judge who can judge how these laws are applied, and that government is not a judge over men, but that God is a judge over men, and that men are the judge of government and how government authority should be applied. So prudence indeed will dictate, is referring again to God, and as the sovereign authority that is able to dictate that governments should not be changed in light of transient causes, but experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer. Now here it's talking about men are disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. So here it's explaining human nature and how man's fallen nature is disposed to suffer, but also having a moral duty or moral right to abolish those governments that, through imposed suffering, violate God's laws, because God's laws are designed so that through our compliance, we would find our happiness and liberty would be enjoyed. So obviously these are all religious references in this last part to God, man, and government, and the order how sovereignty operates, and how men then can serve their higher purpose or natures. And so There's a lot of in here. I can't go into full detail, but I will in the next video cover more in depth how these relate to the Ten Commandments, the Judeo-Christian traditions, and what in particular are these religious ideas that the founders wrote about and what they intended or what they meant when they wrote them into the Constitution of the United States.
Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. In this segment, we're going to take a closer look at the Bible and the preamble to the Constitution of the United States.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Okay, now the purpose of this reading is to clarify a few points that I made in the first two videos. First is that the Constitution was not written to ordain or establish a religion or any form of government, but the Constitution itself was a document ordained by the founders to help establish and secure these blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So again, you see here I've outlined the subject, which is we the people, and then the verbs are in red that describe the actions, and then the blessings of liberties is the objective of these actions described here. So again, we have religious language, we have religious terminology, blessings, clearly religious word, and ordain, a religious term, but not used in reference to establish or ordain a religion or a form of government, but to secure blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity. And so among other duties, you notice the word established is used twice here, but only one time is it used in context with the word ordained. And that's because it's only the Constitution we the people here have ordained and established this Constitution for these purposes. And so we cannot ordain a justice, for example. We can establish justice and ensure domestic tranquility and provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. These are things that can be done through government and laws. But to secure the blessings of liberties themselves is something that can only be ordained by those who follow the spirit and letter of the Constitution and its true meaning. Now, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm not going to go into much detail about the biblical references except to talk about the Ten Commandments. I will elaborate on them here and their connection with Judaic Mosaic laws and their connection to Moses and Judaic Christian traditions. The first point I'd like to make is that the Ten Commandments and how they were presented and how they were established was an interesting story in the Bible because there were three occasions when God presented the Ten Commandments to Moses, not only one. Unlike the movie, the Ten Commandments, we see only once Moses come down from the mountains carrying the tablets with the Ten Commandments on hand. But in reality, in the Bible, it describes that first God spoke the Ten Commandments directly to the people from the heavens, and this is how they first heard these commandments were spoken and given to them. And then secondly, after they refused to speak directly to God and became afraid, they asked Moses to speak on their behalf. And so consequently, they established their first judge and form of government at that point. And so Moses went to the mountain, and then he received the Ten Commandments, which was written by the hand of God, which is also interesting. And so you see, by God's word, spoken word, these commandments were first delivered. And then secondly, by God's own hand, were they written upon these tablets. And then we come to the part where when Moses returned to the camp, he found these people had built the golden calf, and by now they had thought Moses was dead or gone, and forgotten about Moses. And so Moses got angry, and then threw the tablets and destroyed them. And so consequently, a third time, Moses had to go back to the mountain. And this time, God told him to bring the stone tablets, but that Moses would write them down. That God at this point did not either speak or write these words down, but only gave them to Moses to write and to commit these words to him. And so we see that there are these different stages of how the commandments were presented, which represent different stages of authority in government and how the government was formed. First, starting with God offering to be the sovereign authority and word that the people could hear and follow. But then, secondly, then it became something that Moses would pass on, represent, and convey to them that God had given him and written down for him. And then third, then Moses had to write them down and in effect became committed with these commandments to secure God's blessings for the people and on behalf of the people. And so as the story goes on, now let's read the Ten Commandments and let's see what they say and how that relates to the religious language and ideas of the founding fathers. Now here's the Ten Commandments as God spoke them directly to the people on the Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 20, starting from verse 1. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your sons or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in it, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to his neighbor. All the people perceived the thunder, and the lightning flashes, and the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood at a distance. Then they said to Moses, Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But let not God speak to us, or we will die. Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that ye may not sin. So the people stood at a distance, while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. Then the Lord said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, You yourselves have seen that I have spoken to you from heaven. You shall not make other gods besides me, gods of silver or gods of gold. You shall not make for yourselves. You shall make an altar on earth for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen, in every place where I cause my name to be remembered. I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stone for me, you shall not build it of cut stones. For if you wield your tool on it, you will profane it. Now let's review what we've discussed so far.
God's sovereignty is not established by human laws or government, but is established solely by His Word, as He spoke directly to the people when He first gave them His commandments. Secondly, God's laws are created by His own hands, so they're not laws that can be legislated by government officials, but are the result of God's prudence and how, through God's judgment, His laws are established. And then thirdly, God gave the laws to Moses to write down, and at this point we're talking about the government and the responsibilities of the government, that these laws are to be ordained and established by first the people who chose these government officials to rule over them, and secondly, the government officials themselves, like Moses, who are accountable to the people and themselves responsible to carry out these laws. And so here we have an order or a hierarchy of accountability, starting with sovereignty and prudence ordained in the Ten Commandments, and then the order and how these judgments are applied. And so when we look at the Ten Commandments, you could break it up into groups of three. The first three has to do with God and God alone, and the nature of God's laws and the sovereignty of God, and how these laws have authority over man's laws or human government. The next three commandments has to do with these laws as they were established by those government leaders and people that are appointed by the people, as the children of Israel chose Moses to be their representative to speak for them regarding their agreement to keep and follow these laws. And thirdly, we see in the last three commandments how these laws then are applied and how they are practiced, and through practice, how they are ordained and established. And so the last commandment is a summary of the first nine, that it's through man's willingness and through his own choice is how these governments are then able to preserve and secure these blessings. In my next video, I'll talk more about governments and the Constitution and religion and how it pertains to government today. Hi, everybody. Today, we're going to sum up what we've been covering in the last three segments on the Constitution and its relevance and meaning. Love your neighbor as yourself. The basic teachings of the founding fathers was that they had to agree to disagree. They had to find a way that each person could have a different view about government, different view of religion, and still be able to come together and agree on how to form a government that would be just and equitable for everyone. And so the beginning of the Constitution really is the beginning of civil development, how cultures and societies had to learn how to live together despite their differences, whether they be religious or whatever kind of differences didn't matter. And so today, that's the world we live in, is where people now want to divide culture into left and right issues. And so when did the Constitution stop being relevant? I think the Constitution, starting from Jimmy Carter's administration, started to place certain values on legislating morality instead of leading the people and serving the people's interests. Up to a point, there's always been corruption, but corruption started to take on a new name under the Jimmy Carter administration. That's continued through every president, from Ronald Reagan through Donald Trump. And so, if you ask me if I'm a liberal or a conservative, I'm neither. I'm a constitutionalist. I believe the Constitution is what we need to look at in these desperate times. So in this video, I'm going to look at different presidents, starting with the President Jimmy Carter, And then we'll go through the presidents until the current president and also look at some of their candidates and see where we have gone wrong or possibly what we'll need to change to get our government back on the track of becoming a constitutional government and not a divisive government as it now is. Now, for the purpose of discussion, I'd like to read 3 quotes, one from Wayne Dwyer, another from Thomas Jefferson, and a third from George Washington. The ultimate ignorance is the rejection of something you know nothing about and yet refuse to investigate. Wayne Dwyer.
You'll have a greater knowledge of the world you live in when you finish this school than you had when you began. You're seeking after knowledge, and that's good, because knowledge is a foundation, my brother, of faith in anything. Without knowledge, you cannot believe nothing. And the reason a lot of you don't read the Bible is because you don't have any knowledge of it. And when somebody comes out here and tries to give you any knowledge, you scream at him.
Religious institutions that use government power in support of themselves and force their views on persons of other faiths or of no faith undermine all our civil rights. Moreover, state support of an established religion tends to make the clergy unresponsive to their own people and leads to corruption within religion itself. Erecting the wall of separation between church and state, therefore, is absolutely essential in a free society. Thomas Jefferson. Government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is force. And force, like fire, is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. George Washington. Jesus saves. No, I mean Jimmy Carter can save America. Since Jimmy Carter became president, calling himself the born-again president, he was the prognosticator-in-chief whose faith would save the world. From the conception of Carter's administration with a social gospel through which he wanted to save the world, and by legislating equality into law, he became the first social justice warrior that is like we see more and more today. Carter's left leanings naturally led to the rise of the now president Donald Trump, but not at once. It started with Ronald Reagan and was followed by George Bush, who were presidents with religious right leanings. And while Carter's inclinations were leaning toward the left, both of these different religious ideologies clashed. And so did our government, bringing us to our present left-right controversies. And while the Founding Fathers had various views about God and religion, they had sense enough to know that bringing religion into politics was not a good mix, that religion was a personal matter, while government is there, like it says in the Constitution, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So what went wrong? As I've explained in previous videos, in the Declaration of Independence, it talks about these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what are these rights, and how are they assured? Well, they are assured by the Constitution. These truths presented in the Constitution, they are not laws that are required, that are needed. Now, presidents since Carter have been legislating morality, and in so doing, not promoting the common welfare of the public. And so many issues today are what I call wedge issues, because the laws aren't designed to make moral decisions for us. We, by our own conscience, are responsible for our moral choices, and then the laws reflect our moral decisions, not based on our personal beliefs of how we are to live together as a society. So every president since Carter has been trying to legislate their own social gospel, their own version of the Bible, if you will, where the Bible has been cherry-picked, both by the left and the right, just to serve the government's self-interests and not the general welfare of the people. So if we're to have a civil society, we have to have differing views and beliefs, and we have to diligently guard the liberties of those who don't share our views, so that each person can be responsible for their own moral choices, and in that way we can guarantee and support freedom for all.